Good to go? Good afternoon. It's fantastic to be with you. I'm delighted to be able to work with this wonderful panel who are not just colleagues but friends as well. My name's Andrew White. I work at the business school at Oxford University. And in my role, I'm really interested in some of the contemporary issues facing business leaders today. You may have heard the words responsible leadership or inclusivity. Now, what this panel will not be, I can guarantee you, is just hyperbole and waffle. We want to understand the real stories, where people are at, what's working, the practicalities. And I want to involve you as well in that conversation. And so we're going to run for about 20, 25 minutes or so, largely with these three talking, these wonderful people. And then we're going to hand over to questions from the audience. And hopefully we'll allow this to take a life of its own. So, why is this important? I think so many things are changing in the world today, and we're recognizing that things can't continue as they were. And I'm going to tell a short story to put this into context. I was here about 3 years ago, and as part of some of the research I was doing, I was interviewing a CEO of quite a well-known company. And he said this to me, and these words will not leave me. He said, for the past 35 years, it feels like I've been climbing a mountain. And that mountain is my own business. It's the industry that our business is part of, and it's my own leadership journey. The problem is, I'm at the top of the mountain, and it should feel good. But if I'm really honest, it feels like it's crumbling beneath me. I'm surrounded by clouds, and I can't see what way to go. And I can't talk to anybody about this. So he was talking about a very personal thing, a company thing, but also the industry he was part of as well. And I think for me that started to speak about, well, if we've climbed one mountain, what would another mountain look like? And I think what we're going to really touch on is what that mountain, what that new world might look like, or that world that's emerging. So I'm delighted to introduce the panel. So Antonio, Gina, and Belinda, and I'm going to just ask them really to talk about their own journey into this, what they observed, what really triggered their awareness or becoming awakened to this as an issue, and then we will take it from there. So Belinda, do you want to start?
Hello, nice to be here. And talking of mountains as well, given that we're in Davos. I think when you think about responsible leadership, and I did think about it, and as a consultant, I so wanted to define it and then put a framework against it. I just kind of couldn't help myself. But I think that it's almost like how it should be. It feels like the fact that we're discussing this just feels so outdated in a way, because politically where we are, we need this. If you look at the next generation of talent, I heard at Davos this year, 60% of millennials don't want to work for large corporates. And so for me, responsible leadership is what it should be. And I think if I had to boil it down, for me, it's about courage, it's about empathy, and it's about having a clarity of purpose. That is how I would define responsible leadership. So, and it was interesting in the discussion we had before, we talked about rehumanizing the workforce. We are human. Why are we talking about rehumanizing the workforce? So for me, responsible leadership is absolutely what we should be talking about. It's the kind of leaders we want to work with. It's the kind of leaders, and Lisa does a lot of work around purpose. So we've had many of these discussions. And I think it really is just how it should be. And that's what I'm excited about.
I'll ask you a question.
You can, because you're the moderator, so you can ask me anything. And I just have to warn everyone, I have a tendency to overshare. So I just want to warn you now that I will definitely...
Leave now if you...
Yeah. So you have one of the most wonderful job titles I've ever seen, empathy in residence. So you're in large companies, you're trying to make something happen. So can you give us a bit of an insight? Not disclosing too much about the companies, but, what's worked, what's not worked? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to create? And in a sense, what are the successes you're seeing?
So I kind of think of myself and my team as kind of a company doctor, where you go in and you kind of hold the mirror up, because I think every company is dysfunctional. It's a bit like a family. If you came into my family, you would totally think I was, why am I doing what I'm doing? So I think it's my job to go into a company and hold the mirror up and say, where are the empathy deficits and where are the empathy strengths? And I think one of the ways I found to, because I'm working in energy companies and financial companies, is unless you hold the mirror up with data, unless you give real, tangible kind of examples to this. And so for one example, we don't come in and measure, we don't kind of ask what your employment engagement survey is and, how proud people to work for your company and those questions that have been asked for the last 50 years. We will measure things like how many times a CEO will interrupt people in a meeting. We measure blind copy on email. How many BCCs does that company have per employee per week? We look at the number of job titles. So I think one of the key things is holding up, because we're working with rational people who want to be more empathetic often, but don't know how.
And when you go through that process and you hold the mirror up, what do you see happen in a sense? Is there an awakening? Is there a realization? Are there shifts in how they see themselves, how they see their roles as leaders, and what's happening in the organization?
Yeah, sometimes, it doesn't happen as fast as you want it to, and you just have to keep going. And I think responsible leadership, the day you think you're responsible enough is the day you stop being responsible. It really is work in progress. So I think partly, if I'm honest, the sort of enlightened people come to us already, so they've done half the work. But I think the most important thing that I've experienced with CEOs is that the most important thing, it doesn't matter whether how much empathy, all of these things, it's whether you're self-reflective and self-critical. Okay. And that, whether you're open to somebody saying, this is what I'm thinking of what you're doing, this is my perspective, and that is the most fundamental thing.
Last question. If you think about a situation where either you've been at your best in the kind of the doctor role that you talk about, and where you've seen the biggest shift in somebody, the biggest awakening, the biggest aha that has kind of brought about then the biggest amount of empathy or responsible leadership. Does one come to mind of where you've really seen somebody go, I just want to change what I do, I want to move into a different place?
So I think I look at it slightly differently in the fact that it's lots of little aha moments. Because if you think about cultural change, 70% of big corporate cultural changes programs fail. They fail because they're big, they're unwieldy, they're the pet project of the CEO who comes in and has got a new name for it. It might be resilience, it might be empathy, it might be, who knows, it might be responsible leadership, let's hope so. But the point is that actually, I think it's lots of little aha moments. It's thinking about, actually, did I really need to write that? Do I really need to talk about stakeholder engagement and our people as assets? Why don't I just talk about them as people? So I guess actually one thing, just thinking, language. I would say the aha moment, people underestimate the power of language.
Right, so it's almost a rehumanizing of language.
Exactly.
Okay. And Antonia, you're sitting at the helm, or one of the helms, of one of the most important historic banks that exists in the UK with a footprint around the world. You must have been through a lot, seen a lot, and to be here, this is obviously important to you. So do you want to give us an insight from your point of view?
Thank you, and it's great to be here, so thank you. And I feel I'm like Exhibit A after Belinda. Here's the CEO that needs to be transformed, and so now I know why I've been invited to this panel. So, let me step back, and yes, I am in financial services, and I've been for all my career, and I'm at HSBC and leading private banking. So arguably, I'm at the sort of the most conservative end of business. And if we step back and think about, from my perspective, the world has changed, and most business leaders here at Davos and more broadly, I believe, are not equipped to deal with that change. And I think they're not equipped emotionally to deal with that change. And when we think about, and this week has been great, but when we think about the change that we've all been talking about in terms of the broader stakeholder engagement, it's societal purpose, it's more empathy, more diversity. And most of us, why is it that most business leaders, and I include myself in that group, are not equipped to deal with it? Because we were trained as consultants and investment bankers and business school, and everything I've done, my McKinsey, Goldman kind of business, all of this was trained me to be less human and to be more analytical. And and to maximize shareholder value, which is what we've been doing for the last 40 or 50 years. What's interesting is this broader stakeholder and responsible leadership and broader stakeholder capitalism is not new. I think Klaus keeps on reminding us that he came up with it 50 years ago. And so why is it now that we are talking about it? I think, one, because the world has changed. And think about climate as one example. The world is literally burning, and people now realize that in a real way. And from my personal experience, if I go back to 2018, even here at Davos, but from my client interactions, maybe one meeting every 2 or 3 months had an ESG component, typically with a Nordic client. Now, every single meeting I did in 2019 has an ESG discussion to it. And this is private banking clients that probably 2 years ago only were worried about interest rates and another kind of basis point of return on some instruments. So I think the world has changed. As Belinda says, it has changed for our employees. People don't want to be associated with companies that don't have a true and authentic societal purpose, and companies that are not real and authentic about the way they deliver it. Our clients don't want to engage with those companies. And so I think and we've heard this throughout the week, investors themselves don't want to invest in those companies. So I believe that that's what has changed. I still believe from a leadership perspective, if we go back to responsible leadership, we now need a different type of leadership that is more emotional, more empathetic, more human. And I need to disagree with a good friend. I think we do need to rehumanize. And I don't think it's as simple as say, let's all be humans. Because if we've been trained all along to not be vulnerable, to not share emotions at work, to not talk about mental health, to not talk about diversity, it doesn't overnight change because the CEO changes his or her language. I think it takes a much deeper intervention to actually change the way when we finish Davos and go back to our quarterly earnings and everything else. There are real difficult, challenging trade-offs that I faced, and I know many other CEOs are facing right now.
Mm-hmm. And, in your position, being a CEO is not easy. You also observe...
Sympathy.
But you observe other people in their roles struggling, having to put in long hours. And sometimes that's okay, providing nothing's going wrong at home, providing, their health's okay. But you must have seen how that is becoming something that we're not pushing out of the workplace, but we're embracing, we're recognizing is a part of life. And are you feeling, are you seeing that change as well in how you organize and how you, in a sense, you care for people as they move through, try to juggle a challenging job and just the life events that can sometimes hit us? So
I could take that discussion in so many directions. So I think it starts with this sense of purpose. So if going back to, I think we as leaders, and I'll come back to your point about vulnerability and what happens in our personal life and how we bring that to work. But it needs to start with a sense of, okay, what are we here to do? And in my case, I said this to my own team, probably not externally, but when I became the CEO of the private bank, that I'm not here to just make rich people richer. All of those clients here in Davos, I do want to make you richer, but that's not the purpose. Meaning that's not why 6,000 people that work with me in the private bank come to work every day. And so we started a reflection of what are we really here to do. And the way we describe it, which I don't need to take you through all of that, is inspiring our clients to make a positive change in the world. It was actually quite controversial because there was a lot of who are we to tell our clients that they need to kind of do something positive in the world. A lot of our clients already do amazing things, but if we can nudge them, help them, support them, inspire them to actually do something with the incredible privilege, we're talking really of the 0.0001% of the world population, I think we can have a great impact. Now, to answer your question directly, Andrew, then there's an element, let's say that we're done attracting employees that are attracted to that vision and that purpose. I think there's a lot of work to be done within the company to become more human. And if I hear your question correctly, it is, for most of us as leaders, it has been a complete taboo. Even when we talk about mental health, think about mental health. Everybody's been talking about mental health at Davos, right? Everybody. How many CEOs have you seen this week talking about their own mental health? They all go on stage saying mental health is extraordinarily important. The little people, when they have problems, this is what we're going to do for them. I think it's still a taboo to be vulnerable as a leader. And if I use my own experience, a few friends of mine that have followed my journey over the last few years, 2 years ago, my son was diagnosed with 2 very rare genetic conditions, and I took 6 months off work because of that. And I did it because I had no choice, because we didn't really know if he was going to make it, and I had to support my other child and my husband. And I did that. Actually, 10 years ago, a CEO that spent more time with his family, as probably someone who had been fired, actually, or someone who would never return to corporate life. And I think it's a testament in the credit to the company I work for that I came back and I'm now leading one of our global businesses. Leaders need to be able to talk about the struggles that they face at home, how do they deal with it when they come back. For me personally, actually, that period was the most challenging period of my life, but actually coming back to work was probably the most relevant experience I had, because once you come back, people say, so he's okay, right? And so and you say yes, and they say, okay, well, let's go into the P&L. And actually, for any of you that has taken time off work for an extended period of time, coming back to work is horrendous, because you still have the problems at home, and you can't really quite talk about it, and nobody really wants to listen, particularly in the UK. People are quite emotionally repressed. So if you do tell them what's wrong with, I shouldn't say this on camera.
I agree with that.
No, but actually, when people say, how is he? And I would tell, is he okay? And I would say, well, he has 7 different conditions. And people was like, what do I do with this emotion? Meaning I would, and a lot of us do, I spend most of my life at work. I want to talk about what's really meaningful to me right now, which is how healthy or unhealthy my son is. And of course, as much as I'm passionate about private banking, what really mattered to me at that point was that. And I need to create an environment where 6,000 of the people that work with me are able to share whatever is in their mind in a way that I think even 5 years ago we were not doing. I could talk about that for a long time, but
It's really, really good. Thank you. And Gina, you are one of the best people I know at taking people into uncertainty, taking people into not knowing, perhaps taking them into the reality that they can't see what's around them fully, and through the types of work that you do. So, you've got another entrance into this whole subject. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you do and, your understanding of this?
Thank you. So yeah, I think I really enjoy inviting people to get out of their comfort zone. And the reason why is because I really believe that's the moment where our heart and our intuition wake up. If we're used to be really in our heads, controlling things, what I see, I know I'm in charge, and suddenly we take you into the dark, that's part of the work we do, where we do these experiences, there is complete darkness. Because what we want to do is invite people to stop seeing and judging by sight in seconds what's happening around them, and really open their heart and their intuition and be present and connect as human beings. And because sight is so fast, and because we're used to just passing by and judging in seconds what's going on, we need to put our sight to rest. It's like, go to sleep for the moment, and we need all the other emotions and senses to wake up, to really be able to see beyond labels and connect with each other from our stories, from where we come, what moves us. As Antonio was just sharing his story, I'm sure a lot of you could relate to him, because that's from an angle, what we get to see here is a person. And that's what we are looking in these experiences, is we cannot control everything. We think we can, but we don't even know if we're gonna wake up tomorrow. We think we are, but I know a lot of stories that doesn't happen. So I think that's really my motivation, is let's just remember that we are vulnerable. So let's go into certain situations where we can nurture ourselves, we can see what we do have when we're in those environments. We talk a lot, we're in a very vulnerable situation, we don't know what's happening, the change, VUCA world, and we talk and we talk and we talk. And we give all these solutions. And the moment I take the people into the dark, they're like, oh my God, I cannot walk, slow down, where are we going? So I think it's really inviting people to take a time off of what we think we control and listen to the internal light we all have, and how then we can connect and share it and do something stronger. But if we don't take that time, it's difficult.
Yeah. And when you take them through that process, do you notice the conversation shifts? Do they talk at a different level? In a sense, what happens?
I think they just become human beings. Again, talking about, I think in that moment, your labels, your titles, they're irrelevant. It's just people. If you don't speak, you do not exist. As simple as that. So when they're present, more and more we hear these people asking for these moments of just being present, talking about who you are. More and more people are asking to just be more quiet so I can connect with each other. I want to listen. There's less interruptions. And because people cannot really control the conversation, they want to talk about more human things in a way. It's a funny one. It's like I don't want to go too much in talking about the business or the other practical sides, because that I need to control it, that I need to see what's going on. So what we've noticed is people become more human, become more playful, curious, empathetic. Definitely there's this curiosity going on, and I think that's very important.
So, and I want to kind of widen this question out to the three of you as well. So do you think in going to that place of vulnerability, of understanding, the things that cause us stress, anxiety, grief, that can depress us, you might think that takes us away from the organisation. But I have a hunch that you can strategize from that place, that you can make better decisions from that place, that there's a going into, in a sense, if this is like Otto Scharmer's theory we go into our humanity and our fullness of our humanity. I suspect we're then able to see the other more. We're able to see society in a different way. And we're able to strategize in a different way. And in a sense, maybe this is the next phase. These two things aren't separate. The awareness around mental health and vulnerability is not separate from the conversation around purpose and around the different types of decisions that companies need to make. I mean, do you begin to see, and then I'd love your views as well, do you see the two things happening and perhaps them coming together, if not now, then in the future?
No, definitely. I think we're in the journey. I think we're definitely in the journey where we're getting to see vulnerability and risk and the unknown as a hub for innovation, and that becomes very exciting. I think we are in the journey, definitely. We still have to keep going. And I think that's where the narrative has to keep shifting and changing, because for years that was a negative thing, to be vulnerable, to not know what's going on, to take risks with not having everything under control. And as an entrepreneur, I can say that that's our world. You're solving, you go as you go, and that makes you very agile also. But you definitely need to be willing to fall 1,000 times and stand up again and keep going, because that's a world where we are. We don't have, and that's also the analogy of the dinners in the dark and the workshops we do. We don't have visibility. Many times we're leading in the dark. We have to have the ability to move fast enough into the light. So I would say, yeah.
So I think it is a place for innovation, but I think there's quite a lot of strength in vulnerability. Like when we heard you say your story, it felt there was strength in that. And I think this old, alpha male who's running a company, who has to be so tough, it's so outdated. And I think we need to reposition vulnerability as a strength. And I think, for people who are leading organizations or people I'm working with, they often feel very strong in their role because they've done it for so long. It's kind of what you said, you're going through the training. So part of it is finding in your life areas where you are vulnerable, because that is where you can grow. So, for me, in my own work life, I feel pretty strong in that. But actually, I got divorced. I started online dating. And I don't want to turn this into a therapy session, so don't worry, I won't.
No, please.
No, I'm not going to turn it into a therapy session. But I don't feel vulnerable at work. I felt so vulnerable doing online dating. And I think in that thing, I sort of started connecting with people better. So I guess my point is, it's very easy to say, we need to be vulnerable. But actually, in a workplace, you're doing the same thing with the same people. You have to find those areas where you could be vulnerable in your life. And I think your work pushes you. But how do we get that level of vulnerability into the workplace every day? That's the question, because we have to, and it sounds odd, almost institutionalize these practices. Otherwise, they just become workshops or days out or Tinder dates in my case. I had to mention Tinder once.
How do you follow Tinder? So I agree. This the two most fabulous women next to me. I think the way I think about the link with strategy. So for us, it's directly linked to what we do as a core business. All of you bank with someone. HSBC is a great option. And but actually, banking is an industry that's been under tremendous transformation, lack of trust. Kind of, I don't need to take you through what has happened over the last 10 years. And a lot of people want, good technology platform and an empathetic human at the end of that interaction. When I first started thinking for the private bank what our purpose is, back to what I said earlier, the first versions of that purpose were better client service and a great platform, and actually took quite a lot of empathy and a different way of thinking about things to actually get to, we want to inspire people to make the world a better place and to really improve things. And I think the two things are connected, because once you get people in that state of vulnerability and more emotion, not just empathy, but just in a more emotional space, they start thinking about what's relevant for them as people, and therefore what they want to do, rather than what they think clients want from us. Yeah. And then the answer ultimately, and this is what I love the job I have, is I get to meet super interesting people that have incredible life stories. I get to know about them as individuals, and then I get to interact with them in terms of what they want to achieve in their own, we talked about legacy earlier, what they want to achieve in their life right now. And that ability to be empathetic, I completely agree with Belinda and with Gina that you can only be empathetic if you share something of yourself. It's impossible, it's impossible for me to have a discussion with you about, S&P 500 and Fed rates and etc. And at the end of the day, you come out of it saying, "Oh, that's it's a great guy. I trust this company." Meaning, I can tell you, most people, particularly at Davos, go into a meeting to prove that they're smarter than the person in front of them. That's not the way to make an impact. That's not the way to create a trusted relationship. That's not the way to build a banking business or really any business. So I think there is a direct link, to your point, between an empathetic organization and one that is, in our case at least, a strategy that's based on that sense of empathy and then aims for something bigger. And so the link between purpose and vulnerability for me is a very direct one.
Yeah. And I noticed, just as you're talking, reflecting on my own journey through life, I think the points at which I've noticed my empathy open up more or my emotional state open up more to others is when I've been suffering the most. Yeah. I've been going through the hardest. And in a sense, it's almost the pain of difficulty, causes you to I don't know whether it's just me or, I'm more receptive to the other, and then that kind of stays with me. So things get better, but that kind of takes me deeper into that relating.
There's actually, so I had the lunch, which some of you may have attended, with hundreds of things at Davos, but my highlight so far this year was the mental health lunch I've just attended for young people. And my kids are still very young, but it was an incredible session. And the person next to me who works for Time, who is sponsoring that, we started chatting, and at some point he shared the problem his wife had when their kid was, and meaning that was the most meaningful interaction I had versus all the other CEOs I've met at Davos so far, because we started the discussion from a completely different angle of what really matters to both of us and as human beings. And maybe a final thought on that, which is, and I know Gina feels strongly about it, so I'll give you the microphone. So if you think about, we've talked a lot about we as individuals and me as an individual in my company, we've talked a lot about diversity and inclusion for decades, years. And it tends to be a very frustrating debate. I'm actually a bit tired of D&I. And it's a very HR-driven debate. And for me personally, 5 years ago, I was here at Davos and we did a panel on LGBT diversity. And at that time, we were kind of almost in clusters, if you know the geography, meaning it's like I think the WEF wanted this as far away as possible from the Congress Center. And this is the first time that there's two panels actually on LGBT diversity within the Congress Center. Someone wrote on Reuters that it's the gayest Davos ever. And then they said, but not quite gay enough. And at that time, I talked about my own experience, and I thought I was doing a good thing as a role model. Actually, I now think about diversity and inclusion much more from a client perspective. It's no longer about our own workforce being diverse. We have a partnership as the private bank with Albright, which is an organization some of you may know that supports women in business. It's just good common sense, meaning I believe in gender equality. I've believed in gender equality all my life, but actually, most of the wealth of our clients is held by women. It's created by women. It's created in... So it's actually good common sense that we're associated with someone like Albright and actually taking some of our internal agendas, like diversity and inclusion, and actually making them a broader society, a broader sort of client engagement. I think there's something about us no longer almost hiding the things we're doing internally and kind of being a bit more courageous in terms of the stance that we take in the outside world. And I think there's a role for us as business leaders to do that. And I think vulnerability and empathy is something we can role model, but also then talk about it externally. So
I've done understanding your power and also the multiplier effect you can have. I mean, some big companies have extraordinarily footprints on the world. And if you can then start to move that out into other organizations or people that you're working with, it's incredible. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to add that I'm also tired of diversity and inclusion conversation, to be honest, because I find it's a very limiting label, and that is quite unrealistic that we're still talking about that, because diversity, inclusion, it's all over. Like, just nature is diverse. Like it's just there. It shouldn't be an issue. You go to a restaurant and there's diversity of things you can eat. Like, if you really think in our daily behaviors, why for some things we are willing to try all the different things or go and enjoy them, and yet when it comes to relating to people, we are putting them in boxes, and that I find it ridiculous. And that's why a lot of my work is, there's so much untapped talent that we're not seeing because we keep focusing in the labels. None of us, our identity is the badges that we all have there, our titles, where we're working. Antonio is Antonio. Antonio is not HSBC. No, Belinda is Belinda, like, you have your own thing. But I feel we are all, our labels are part of us. But I say labels are an invitation to get to know the person, not a limitation. It should be the opportunity to be curious and to be empathetic, but also respectful. Because it's true that because on the journeys we go, we will have our biases. It's very difficult to outsmart our biases. But then it comes to a point to be aware and then respect, to say, okay, I understand the story and I respect it. Maybe I'm not going to hang out all the time and I'm going to relate 100% because we're humans. But I think that's part of why my driver about diversity and inclusion is simply, we are human beings. By nature, we're diverse. We're missing out. There's a lot to learn from each other. Let's be curious. Listen to the stories. That's the key. That's where we're going to connect. That's where we find things in common, not on the label.
One last point, then we'll go to questions.
Okay, so I think all of that, and I love what you said. I think the problem we have is the system, which is the corporate organization, is so powerful and is set up and structured. So if you think about the number of levels in an organization, grades, I have people in meetings at the companies I work with, and they won't talk they'll talk less once they know the level of the person they're with, right? This is what happens. So yes, but it's very hard to do those things. Also, job titles. We measure the number of job titles in an organization. In some large organizations, there are as many job titles as there are individuals. I mean, that is not, honestly. So I think what we've got to change, we can't just change the individuals. We have to change the system. And the system, the corporate system, is so powerful. We need to almost smash it up because, when you're sitting in a meeting and you're afraid to speak because somebody is more senior than you, how on earth are you going to get great leadership, great innovation and courage?
And great contributions.
Yeah. You already have a microphone.
Okay. So we've got about 20 minutes to go. Thank you to the three of you for some really, really interesting insights into your own journey through this, what you're seeing, some really practical stuff from you, Belinda. So I thought I'd take 3 questions at a time that will enable us to get, some more kind of ideas into the room. So who's going to offer me the first one? Yeah. You'll take the microphone because we are recording.
I'm okay.
No, it's for the recording.
Okay, sure. Okay. So my name is Faisal. I'm a YPO Capital from Pakistan. I work in education. So we do K-12 schools across the country. So I mainly work with a lot of women and children. So empathy is not something that we practice. We teach empathy. We experience empathy. We live empathy. So we have a very inclusive, holistic, whole school approach. And then I've got 3,000 professional teachers and practitioners employed in the company and thousands of young children. But when it comes to the corporate governance of my teaching and learning company in Pakistan, so when, because empathy is something that we live for, because we are coming bottom up through the classrooms, Many a times the staff says, sir, we are done with this jazz of your empathetic approach. Show some sympathy. Give us more money. Show, help us develop more, and so on and so forth. Actually, now the question.
So your question.
The question is that now in these times of corporate populism and departmental protectionism, and they're hearing narratives like, oh, we should have a 4 working day by the new Prime Minister of Finland. So let's say that there's a more younger Prime Minister in Belarus or in Russia. If they say the world should have 3 working days. So staff are popping up. One woman.
I need a question.
So my question is that how do you deal with corporate populist perspectives when looking at corporate leadership and responsible leadership?
Okay, thank you. Another question? I'm a professor, so I will cold call if a hand doesn't go up. Thank you.
Hi, Lisa McCallum, Inspired Companies. I'm curious with back on the language topic, vulnerability, empathy, sympathy. I don't actually find when I'm in boardrooms that those words land, nor are they actually helpful to unite a board. That 40% might resonate with that sort of language. 20% is uncomfortable; they're not going to say anything, and then the balance of that are going to sit there noticeably uncomfortable. So, any experience on the panel for how you actually can unify? What language do we use? What tactics, what strategies do we use in a boardroom to actually get to the impact of what you're asking for, but bring the folks that just aren't going to feel good when they hear those words?
Let's take both, because I think you're both in a very similar space. You've got people who've been around a long time, cynical, want 4-day weeks, and where the language doesn't work. So. Do you want to kick?
Yeah, firstly, I love the sound of what you do, Faisal. And I think I do disagree, though, because the thing about empathy is it is a learnt skill. So by the age of 23, 24, your IQ is fully formed, okay? It doesn't change. You don't get smarter. You might be in a meeting and want to prove you're smart, but you actually don't get smarter. But the thing about empathy, it is a learnt skill. And I think people don't realize that. They think, oh, I'm just not empathetic, or I've never had much empathy. I hear this all the time. Actually, we're all work in progress. It is malleable. So I think that is one really important point. In terms of the language, sympathy is me feeling sorry for you. It's like, oh, you had such a bad day, Lisa. I'm so sad for you. That is sympathy. Empathy, and I call it empathy in action. It's about us saying, right, we have an issue. We don't have to label it empathy, but we have an issue. What impact? The best word you can use in a boardroom is impact. And what impact is that having on our people, on each other, and on you? So I think that language is really important, but I do think we need to make the difference between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy is feeling sorry for someone. Empathy is about understanding your impact and working with that person to actually change the world.
I agree. I'm just taking it in a completely different direction, because actually I think both of you touched on this, which is this, and you talked about it in terms of impact. So what do I experience in the boardroom, and how? And this is not easy. This is not straightforward, because we also need to be realistic that there is a balance here, right? So if I can be running an amazing, empathetic company, if it makes no money, I will not be the CEO of that company. So there is a sense of, I believe that there's no conflict, because I believe that a longer-term sustainable company is one that's founded on purpose, where our employees are happy and we deliver good service for our clients. That's the theory. But there is a tension between the two, because if you set out your stool as a CEO that I want to create an empathetic organization, and that's what I go out to the markets, and then I have 3-4 quarters of financial underperformance, there will be someone else in my seat. And therefore, I think it is important that we balance those things, and even deeply purpose-led organizations like yours need at the sort of corporate level to have a reality of, can our employees work 3 or 4 days, and how do we do it? Can we do it? So there is being purpose-led and empathetic doesn't mean that all of a sudden I'm not running a company, and there is a harsh reality of that. Now, to answer your question, Lisa, in the boardroom, I agree. I think it is extremely difficult to introduce some of these topics. The way I do it is links to something Andrew said earlier, which is I make it a core part of our strategy. So if I think about the private bank, I normally talk about creating a different type of private bank and a better private bank. And I lead with that with the boardroom in the same way that I do with clients or with our employees. But for the boardroom, I then talk about creating $1 billion of profits and return on equity above 20% and kind of what my entire 20 plus years of career have taught me to do. And by the way, that's what we're delivering, which is great. But the way we do that is about connecting to people that are real human beings, a bit what I said earlier. And the board gets that. They don't need to buy into, empathy is the way to go. And they don't need to buy into that. They need to buy into the fact that in order to connect with the top kind of private equity, private banking clients around the world, that there is an element of empathy to connect with them that is important for our business. So in a way, I think most CEOs need to have their own narrative and their own words to reconcile the how, kind of what are we doing, and with the ultimate outcome. And if we then talk about the impact, I think you can actually connect to board members that way, provided you continue to deliver. And this is where I think that tension is important.
Consultants can help greatly.
I know. And then if there is an empathy business, you can then hire. There you go. Can I just say one thing on that, because I want to disagree with a good friend. It's no. You said something, Lisa, which is actually not Belinda's point. Sometimes programs around it are really unhelpful, and you also said this, which is for the CEO to come out with the empathy program and for it to be branded everywhere and to be. It's actually really counterproductive. So and actually, and that can actually completely backfire on the individual as a CEO and on the board, because you become that guy, that person, the person that is it's your own pet thing. I really like what you were saying, which is the small number of interventions that really make a difference, and it's really changing the culture, changing the language. This is where language is unhelpful. If you all of a sudden have this big program. And I've seen this in many different organizations, it actually can backfire when people then end up almost using that against you. And I could go on about that, but I'll let you answer.
I would just add from what has been said. I think on the empathy conversation, a lot of it is, for me, empathy, it's also connection and collaboration. And that's why it's so important. And I think when the organizations understand that when you get to get more into the empathy conversation and feel it and learn it, the results is you're going to have better connection with people, and that the other result is collaboration and then innovation. So I think it's taking it deeper into the results, not just talking about it and why it makes sense, and because it's fashionable at the moment also. How do you take it into the why this makes sense? Because if we get to this, then these are the results, and then it becomes much more interesting, it's more relevant, because we need to collaborate, we need to work in teams. We are in that stage where if we don't do that, we're staying behind. So that has helped them see it from another, not just the softy, that sounds nice, but then let's get things going. And again, here, that's what you were saying, Lisa, it's for me, it's less talking and more doing. That's why I do the experiences. A lot of talking is out there, a lot of numbers, everyone talks, and this is how it should be, and they talk about the others, and we were saying they don't put themselves vulnerable. No, we need to be able to get there. And my experience is that it's not the talking that does it. I go into the experience in different ways. I always work experiential. And at the end, the discussion comes in on co-creating the language, rather than trying to say, this is what it's going to be. Even how I name that, I talk a lot with the companies when they say, oh, we're going to call the workshop, vulnerability or diversity. I was like, no labels. Talk about whatever other name, but don't use the label. Because then people come in with one idea and they switch off. So in my case, it's more doing than talking, and in also showing the results, taking them in that journey.
That's great, thank you. Two more questions.
Thanks, Andrew. My name is Almira Kamel. I work with FTI Consulting. Building on something Belinda said, well, a few things Belinda said, the question may be directed to Antonio and everyone else if they want to chip in. So reshaping or smashing and rebuilding the structure is what you said is needed, and also that you often work with companies who are all almost there. Could you imagine a world in which, Antonio, you were having this narrative, this kind of inspired leadership, inclusive leadership, all of that, at HSBC before its monitorship, and before all the ML investigations and tidying the house in that regard. Could your employees have bought into it, right? Do we need, in the smashing of the system, do we actually maybe need to follow the system a little bit more tighter? Can we think of the world in which actually to get into the inspired leadership or inspired companies, as Lisa would call them, we have to bear in mind that that it all holds water. The regulatory part of it, that we're not having a company which is on one hand, having this great inclusive leadership, and then, FCPA breaches.
Yeah, agree. So it's a great question and super. Thank you, Almira. I start from the point that two different thoughts came to mind. One is there's never a good moment to do any of what we've just described. There will always be something happening, lots of things happening. And so if I take the example of the purpose discussion that we spoke about just a few minutes ago. So I did this last year for the private bank, and at the same time we were restructuring the private bank, which we were growing in some geographies, but we were letting people go in others, and there was a bit of this, why are we even talking about purpose when I'm losing my job? Why are we talking about purpose when we don't have a good IT platform? Why are we talking about purpose when the results are not what they should be? And my answer was precisely, actually, when we have to go through these challenges, we need to have, and precisely when there's lots of uncertainty on leadership changes in any company, which, by the way, is all the time, everywhere, as Gina was saying, in this sort of VUCA world, you need to have something that's constant and that doesn't change. And if you think of, there's hundreds of books and literature on this, but if I draw from my own experience, actually, I was reading a good book on infinite purpose just over Christmas and New Year's. There needs to be something which is infinite. There needs to be something which is clear and is not changing. And that, for me, is a sense of purpose and then how you interact with your people. Interestingly, if I think of the experience of HSBC, we went through a period where precisely because, and for everybody else's context, I know you know it well, we had the first prosecution agreement in the US, we were going through quite a lot of control issues. And yes, you need to do both at the same time. So the reaction of companies is typically to tighten things, to put more controls in place, to more accountability with less delegated authority. Most companies do this. You rein in the control to the center. You can do that. Exactly, you use it without creating fear, but actually for very large organizations with over 200,000 people like us, typically you create a culture of fear. And what I've done throughout that period is work at the same time on empowering people and making them feel comfortable. Because if you have compliance problems in any of your companies, the last thing you want is for people to be fearful, because they will not raise concerns and you will perpetuate the problem, right? So we had amazing campaigns around for people to speak up, but because at the same time they were afraid, that wasn't working. So we had to do quite a lot of work. I was running our UK operations at the time on creating a much more human, empathetic environment at the same time as we were doing that. And the final thought, or the other thought I had, was you also, several of you know me as a person, as an individual, you also can't wake up one day and saying, I'm the responsible, inclusive leader that I ever was, but you never saw. Meaning there is an element of credibility. Meaning I'm in my mid-40s. Kind of my life speaks for itself. I think as a leader, you need to be authentic to who you are. I agree that people change and empathy can be learned, but you can't be the person that only asked about the return on equity and the PBT, and the next morning wakes up and asks you about little Johnny and is super empathetic about it. It's like, meaning, don't even try. Meaning, if you've never gone there, I prefer for you to be authentic and just ask me about the numbers. And there's some people that kind of read the book, wake up, and all of a sudden are, it's the new me. I'm empathetic, and I think for all of us as leaders, it is a journey. It's a journey as a human being. But you need to be authentic to that journey, and you need to evolve. And particularly right now, people see through that in a nanosecond. The moment there's something that just doesn't feel right, of everything I've said so far, there'll be things you'll say, that's absolute honesty, and there'll be stuff that you'll say, that's just BS. And so, and And you can tell. I mean, you can tell as a human being what is real of what you're saying and what's not. And as a leader, you need to be super aware of that. And that's why, linking to Lisa's question, there's a lot of language that, the head of HR just convinced you to do a diversity program. And when that came from the head of HR versus the CEO. Because you can't even find the language. At some point, someone I was working with is like, and Antonio's doing great work on BLTG or whatever he said. And so even, and it's embarrassing when someone can't get the acronym right. But it's but the point is, he was trying. That's the point. That's what. But there is an element of, you need to be authentic in what you do, and I think, back to your question, you have to do these things at the same time. You can't say, I have a compliance problem now, it's not the right time. I have a cost problem, it's not the right time. You need to actually do it in a credible, authentic way, but you need to do them both.
But let's remember, a lot of engineers are running companies, so you use the word evolve. So, a lot of the people running the FTSE 100 don't come from that background, are not kind of going to wake up and talk about Johnny's kids, That is not their kind of center. So I guess I do want to make the point, we have to be authentic, but ultimately CEOs have to evolve. And just because you've never done it before doesn't mean you can't start it today, but it has to be done in an evolution. So, and there is an element of faking this till you make it. I mean, like when you least feel, the best time for you to practice your empathy is when you least feel like it. So choose someone you absolutely dislike, okay, and practice your empathy skills, or when you're tired. Because if I like you, it's so easy for me to show you empathy because we might have children of the same age, or, we just, can get on. But if I don't like you, and I do, actually, I'm so sorry to pick on you because I don't know anything about you. But actually, if I don't like you, that is where my empathy levels are tested. So I guess it's not about you're good at it. My worry is it's kind of binary, a lot, and I don't want it to be binary. I want you to think, actually, we can all be better, including...
So kind of have to bring things to a close. Yeah. Hugely interesting. I want to close in a slightly different way to we normally close these things. And, many people know me in my job at the business school at Oxford University. I also started writing poetry about a year ago. I have only ever read a poem in public once before. But when I was talking over lunch with these guys, they said, you need to read something. So my invitation to you is just take a few moments. This type of poetry is best listened to with your eyes shut. So that's my invitation.
Good, I like that.
And to take some time, and the process really is to be a framework.
Poetry in the dark.
Poetry in a framework for your imagination. And so please enter into it in a way that you feel comfortable. The poem's called Earth. Oceans and sky, grasslands, desert, forest, creatures of ocean, of sky, of jungle and savanna. And then us, in cities and villages and towns. What is beyond us? Beyond these identities and beliefs and conflicts and countries. To the field beyond right and wrong, where we are one. Where one touch of nature makes the whole world kin. United beyond hurt and pain and grief and fear and judgment. Into the dance of masculine and feminine, of heaven with earth, of black with white, of rich with poor. Dancing as one, as this is all there is. When we dance in Rummy's field. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. Vulnerability.
Totally vulnerable.
So thank you to all of you. Thank you to the panel. I think it's been a wonderful conversation. I've certainly learned things. I hope you have too. And enjoy the rest of Davos. Thank you.